Well, we get a former Kitchener Ranger on the show this week, but I think best known certainly for his time in the National Hockey League with the Buffalo Sabres, none other than Vezina Trophy winner Don Edwards joining the OHL podcast. It's a real pleasure. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
I'm always curious how guys end up deciding that what they want to do in the game of hockey is stand in front of pucks. Like, why, Don? Why would you even go down this path?
Well, it was something at an early age in life, I wanted to be a goalie. My idol was Glenn Hall, still is. And, my uncle was a goalie in the National Hockey League as well. Had a long career in the minors. And then in the 67 draft, he got a chance to move on and play in the National Hockey League with Pittsburgh and Detroit. So I think it was in my lineage, I guess, to move in that direction. I had a dream and I followed that dream.
You mentioned Glenn Hall, and word was that he had a little ritual, let's call it, before every game where he would get sick to his stomach. What about you? Any rituals like that or anything else?
No, I didn't have any rituals like that, thank God. But I always, there were certain things I did. The left skate went on before the right skate, things like that. The way I did my pads up, just small little things that I taped my stick the same way for all my professional and junior career. It was just little things that you sort of go through these things. You really don't think they're something that really affect your game, but you were trying to stay on the right side to make sure your mind was clear.
Did you ever talk to your goalposts?
All the time. They were my best friends. And now that I'm retired, I don't think about them at all anymore. I don't talk to them anymore either.
How could you? It was such a long-lasting relationship, Don.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a grandson now that's starting to play, and he wants to be a goalie now. So I'm getting my thrill late in life, I guess, to watch somebody else.
Are you jealous in any way at the equipment that your grandson's getting to use compared to what you were using 40, 50 years ago?
Well, it's sort of funny you mentioned my grandson. He's just 5, and I've told his mother and father that like myself, my father was very instrumental in my direction. But I had to be the best skater on the team before I became a goaltender, and that wasn't until the age of 14. It's extremely important. Kids skate well. Back then when I was playing, you're carrying 35 pounds of equipment. Today, these kids are carrying about 20 pounds at most. It's all very light stuff. It's all ballistic. And equipment we use. I mean, we got, we're wearing face masks that were paper thin and strapped flat on our face. So it was a different air. And quite simply, in today's game, I couldn't play. I'm too small. I'm only 5'9.5". And today's goalies are all 6'3", 6'4", and they're big guys. And my fortune is taking the little man out of the net.
I wondered about that because the knock against you even back then was small-ish. And I wondered if that's something you had to battle through as much as battling against, people shooting pucks at you.
Well, I was maybe small, but I was very lucky. When I was playing my junior career in Kitchener, there were certain habits that, I was able to get rid of, as I went into my first year of pro. I had a great coach in Hershey. His name was Chuck Hamilton, and he really took me under his wing. And, just up the road at that time, Bernie Prom was in his heyday with the Flyers. And Bernie was the first real stand-up goaltender outside of Plant. And so I had the opportunity to watch him on a regular basis. And Chuck just kept saying to me, get on your feet, get on your feet. And it was all angles and body presence. And so that's the way in which I learned to play. And, it was funny. Some of the guys that I played against, would often come up to me after I was retired. They said, you were, a real stand-up goalie. And I found that I take that as a real compliment, because it was probably the difference of me playing in the National Hockey League and me not. If I would have been a V butterfly goaltender, I didn't have the size to take away the upper part of the net, although I had great quickness. I needed to rely on my size, and that was staying on my feet.
As a Southern Ontario boy, what was it like when you learned that you'd be playing for the Kitchener Rangers?
Oh, I was thrilled. I mean, we'd won the Junior C championship in Caledonia. That was a great thrill. And then being drafted in the fourth round by Kitchener and going there, I knew, Eddie Bush had a great reputation as being a tough disciplinarian and a good hockey mind. And when him and Mike Penny came to visit me in my home in Woodburn, and I knew I was drafted, but when they came in, I was ready. I mean, I was all set to go. And so my first day in training camp, they had already said, go get a new set of pads, go get skates at the Bauer plant. I was ready to go. And so I loved Kitchener. Kitchener-Waterloo was one of my favorite places. I've still got many great friends there. And, I had a great junior career.
You mentioned those names, Eddie Bush and Mike Penny. Those are legendary names in Kitchener Rangers history. By not only you talk about Eddie and his disciplined approach, but Mike too, and finding players and building some really good hockey clubs.
Well, they had some great teams. I was very lucky to play with some very good players in Kitchener. I think, looking back, to play there for 2 years and be the first team OHL All-Star and first team OHL All-Star, and just all the things that have happened to me as I moved on into my professional career, to the Buffalo Sabres, being the AHL MVP in my second year, although I only played until mid-February, and going through to the Calder Cup finals that first year against the Nova Scotia Voyageurs, and then moving on to Buffalo. And, I won a lot of awards in Buffalo. I mean, I have to give credit to a lot of people on the way that sort of touched me and gave me great advice.
Who stands out?
Well, I stand out. Chuck Hamilton, Eddie, along the way. I mean, Eddie Chadwick was another one that gave me some good advice. Punch Imlach was he was a real source of information for me. I mean, he'd come up to me quite often and say, "Hey, kid, you need to challenge a little bit more and get on your feet a little bit more again." And he could sense that I was tired at times, and so Punch would come and talk to me, and it was really an interesting time. Just my years in Buffalo were cherished, and played with some great teammates there, and then moving on to Calgary, where I met Glenn, and then into Toronto.
It's a really incredible career, and I'm thinking back on the time you were in Kitchener, Don, and the organization, really the franchise, was still very much in its infancy. Now 60 plus years strong, and Friday nights are hockey nights in Kitchener, as I know they were back then. But we're talking 7,000 fans per game now. What was it like? How much had the city embraced the team back then?
Oh, the building, Mike, was pretty much full back when I played as well. It was, there wasn't too many games that the building wasn't filled. I mean, Kitchener-Waterloo really support the Rangers. It's an organization that has a tremendous legacy there. There's been some great players go through that organization, and I think it comes back to the billets. They embrace the players. You become part of their family. They really make you part of the community, and I think that's what makes Kitchener-Waterloo so special, is that the people just come out and they understand what that organization means to them. And it's a dynasty there, as far as it's not going anywhere. And it seems like they've done many expansions to the auditorium, but they continue to fill it.
Yeah, it's I mean, we still refer to it as a cathedral, really, because it's got that hockey arena feel to it. As opposed, the new ones are nice and they've got those creature comforts, but the odd, while having expanded a couple to a few times since you were here, is still very much that classic hockey arena.
Well, we played all of our games out of there. The only times we weren't there was when Oktoberfest was going on, which I imagine is still going on right now in Kitchener. It just ended. But it's really a special place. I mean, the fans got into it. I mean, the people that used to come to the games, that watched my career, and then as I moved on in life, they became good friends. I mean, it's really something special to look back on and say to yourself, I was very blessed to play there. And as every kid that has had the opportunity, or every player that's had the opportunity, to play in Kitchener, I think they would all, say the same words, is that how kind the community was to them.
You got to play while you were here with a fellow by the name of Dwight Foster, who still holds the record for most career points as a Kitchener Ranger. And I don't think that's going to be a record that's broken, for what it's worth. But when you were playing with him, I mean, Did he make it look easy? What was he like?
Well, Dwight was drafted very young too. I mean, he was, he was a young player being drafted. I think Dwight was 16 when he got drafted, 15, 16. He made the team immediately and, stuck around there a long time. And when he first got there, I mean, in that second year, I guess, our team was pretty much drained of potential. I think we had 5 first rounders that my first year that were first round picks of the NHL, and then we had 4 second rounders. So it was blessed with a very talented team. Unfortunately, we had a couple of key players go down in the playoffs. One was Dougie Riseborough, who hurt his knee, and then Peter Sturgeon went down. And we lost a couple of key guys to us in there, and so we didn't go quite as far into the playoffs as we really maybe wanted. But Dwight came in that next year, and the team was a complete rebuild, and it was a different story around what Dwight's career, and he had a great career in Kitchener. I didn't follow it all that closely, to be honest with you, because I had moved on into the NHL, the American League, and then the NHL. But a few years later, Dwight appeared in the NHL as well.
You talk about the talent that you had on those teams with you in Kitchener, and then moving on that Calder Cup appearance with Hershey, and then into the National Hockey League when you start with the Buffalo Sabres, arguably in their first heyday. The French connection is there. I mean, Don Edwards was a part, and not to take away from your talent by any means, but boy, oh boy, did you have some talented teams to play with.
We did, and the weird thing about it at the time, Buffalo was one of the top 3 teams in the league. It was Montreal, Buffalo, and Philadelphia, and then you could maybe throw the Bruins in there too. I mean, we were the dynasty teams of that time. I mean, at some point we all had to go against each other in the playoffs. But I still remember the bench clearing brawls with the Montreal Canadiens and the Philadelphia Flyers and the Boston Bruins. I mean, we went at it and we knew we were in for a tough game. But it was a good time for me to play in the league. I always marveled at going against Ken Dryden and Bernie Pront and Jerry Cheevers. They were sort of the main stable guys in the league at that point. And to be considered in that elite group at the time, I was really honored.
As a goaltender, what do you do when the brawl's happening? Do you find Ken Dryden or Bernie Pront or Jerry Cheevers and kind of square off? What happens?
Well, it was funny, Mike. I probably started as many as someone else. I mean, I can recall starting at least 5 or 6. We had some pretty tough guys in Buffalo at the time, and Lee Fogland and Rick Dudley and Jimmy Schoenfeld and Jerry Korab, and there was quite a few others as well. But we weren't afraid to drop the gloves and go at them. And back then it was sort of funny that certain guys always matched off against each other. It was there was great respect between the 2 teams, and the heavyweights would get at it, and the other guys, the lightweights, would sort of shoulder up to each other. But I don't remember going toe to toe with any goaltenders. As close as I came was in the playoffs when I was with Calgary when we went against Winnipeg one year.
All right, so you're playing goal for the Buffalo Sabres, and the flower is coming down the wing, and that hair is flowing as he's skating along. What goes through your mind as a goaltender?
Well, it was funny. I played it with Guy in the '81 Canada Cup, and I did pro tips with him in Quebec too, the Howie Meeker pro tips, and so I got to know him a little bit. But when I first got in, I was a rookie, and I was a deer in headlights for, when you played the Canadians because they had the big teams. Surprisingly, I was very, very fortunate in my first game in the Montreal Forum. I shut them out 6-0, and that was something that I'll never forget. Before the game, Danny Garrett came up to me, and I was sitting on the players' bench taping a stick, and he came out to me, sat down with me for about 10 minutes. He said, "Kid, you got to breathe." And he kept saying, Dart, you got to breathe. And he goes, and then let it out real slow. And I did that for about 3 minutes, and he was just trying to get me calmed down. Well, we went out that night, the team played great, and we beat them 6-0. And, I look back on moments like that, that really are highlights in my career that you like to remember, and there'll be something for the history books.
One thing I noticed about you, Don, when we look back on your statistics, and this goes back to junior when I saw you appearing in 65 games with the Kitchener Rangers, the year that you won the Vezina, I believe it was 72 games that you appeared in for the Buffalo Sabres. Clearly, you must have relished the workload, or was it just, look, Dart, you're up, and you kept going?
I believe the year we won the Vezina, I played 92 games that year in total between regular season and exhibition and playoffs. I mean, it was a healthy workload. And I remember playing a lot of games in Kitchener. I mean, first year I went there, Bob Blanchette was the goaltender that was supposed to, get all the praise, and very quickly Eddie had me in the pipes, and all of a sudden Bob was out the door, and I was playing all the games. So they had a lot of trust in me. I loved to play the games. I mean, I just loved to play, and every opportunity that came, I was in there. So there wasn't too many nights that I didn't want to, I wanted to sit on the bench.
Okay, so I'm just thinking on that conversation with Danny Gary saying breathe, kid. And
Yeah.
I mean the pressure, there's so much pressure on a goaltender, Don. I don't have to tell you that. What's the secret? We always talk in the broadcast booth about, having a short memory. Don Cameron always said, I'll never say on the air he probably wants that one back because a goaltender wants all of them back. How did
Yeah.
you mentally deal with the pressure of the position?
Mind over matter, really, Mike. It was really a situation that, I started later, in my career as I moved into the pros. I started playing the games in 5-minute segments. So instead of playing 20-minute segments or 60-minute segments, I started breaking the game into 5-minute segments. And what occurred is that, if I didn't allow a goal in the first 5 minutes, in that 5 minutes, I won that segment. And that was like a little boost to me. And then all of a sudden, okay, let's win that next segment. And so I think it was a really good leveling board, if anything else, to keep me focused. I mean, it's easy when you give up a goal to say, geez, they're going to get another one right away. But I took the other attitude and I said, it's just that game is over and I've got to start a new 5-minute segment. So they scored 12 minutes in the game. That segment was over and I would start a new 5-minute segment. It really helped me, I think. And I forget who I talked to about that, but somebody sort of recommended about breaking it down. It might have been Chuck Hamilton. It might have been, one of the coaches I had maybe in Buffalo or something, but it really helped me to just focus and for that immediate moment. Goaltending is a funny game. The play goes into the other end. There's a lot of play in the neutral zone. It's really once play gets inside the blue line that the focus of a goaltender has to be sharp.
When we talked about that Vezina Trophy in the 79-80 season, you said of course, you and your goaltending partner in Buffalo, Bob Sauvé, shared that trophy. What was the relationship between you and Bob like?
Bobby and I got along really well. I mean, it was an unusual relation in some way because Bob was a first round pick. I was a fifth round pick, as you know. Bob had it in his contract to stay in Buffalo when he first was drafted. Well, he was in Buffalo for 3 months. He wasn't playing. He was the third guy there, or third or fourth guy, because back then they had Jerry Desjardins, they had Gary Bromley, and Al Smith was there as well. So Bobby became the third and fourth guy. I was the guy that was supposed to go to Hershey, fill the void there until Bobby came, and then be sent on to Charlotte, which at that time was in the old the East Coast Hockey League. Well, I got to Hershey. I played so well that it came time to send Bob to the minors in December, and Frank Mathers, the general manager, and Chuck Hamilton said send Sauvé to Charlotte. And so I got the chance to stay in Hershey, and I relished that opportunity, and that year we went on to the Calder Cup Finals against Nova Scotia, and we lost in 7 games. So, and I think half that team out of Nova Scotia went on to play in the National Hockey League the next year because it was a split Montreal-Atlanta franchise.
You talk about being drafted in the 5th round to the Buffalo Sabres, but that same year, the WHA's San Diego Mariners also drafted you. What happened there? And did you not like warm weather? Like, what the hell did you choose Buffalo for?
Well, I live in warm weather now, as you know. I'm here in Florida, Southwest Florida. I absolutely love it. But yes, I was drafted. It really wasn't a consideration because back then I knew if I was going to play in the World Hockey League, I was going to become the backup goaltender, and I wasn't going to play. So they're going to offer me $12,000, $15,000 to be the backup goaltender, and then with no experience. So my career, I really knew that my career at that point was probably at a dead end. So, keeping with the decision to stay in junior and then, be drafted to the NHL, I was lucky enough. And, from there, all the pieces fell in place. And thank God, because I didn't know what I don't know what else I would have done.
You're a puck stopper at that time, right?
For sure. But anyways, it was a great career.
those Buffalo teams, Don, I remember them so fondly, even though I admit to being a Leafs fan, and we'll get to your stop in Toronto a little bit later. But
That doesn't make you a bad person, Mike.
thank you, sir. Sometimes I feel like it, and I'm told I am, but that's good to know. But
Yeah.
we got the Buffalo Sabres game of the week on Saturdays on WGR here in Southern Ontario. I loved listening to Ted Darling. I was watching the games with you and Perro and all these other guys. We've already talked about all the talent. They were some really good teams. What was it that kept you from just getting over the top?
Well, I think there was a certain amount of magic. I think if anything, I think we probably missed a little bit of what I would call coaching discipline. At the time, Montreal was dominating and Scotty was behind the bench, and Scotty had a tremendous mind. I mean, I've got to, I played for Scotty for a few years when he finally came to Buffalo, but Scotty had he had a tremendous mind for the game. He was 2 and 3 moves ahead of everybody. And, I think that was one of the things we missed. The other thing that was disappointing is when Scotty first came, I think he took the position that he wanted to build his own team. And I think if he would have left, 90 to 95% of that team together, we may have won a cup. But he was quick. The first thing he did is Rennie Robert went out the door, so that broke up the French connection. Then Schoenfeld went out. Then Korab and Luce went out, and the list goes on and on. And all of a sudden, the core of the team had been broken. And so, the remaining parts of that was Craig Ramsey, myself, and maybe Billy Height. Of the start, because we had Robert gone. Oh, excuse me, Jobert was still there as well. We still had this, the star, but Martin was gone, Robert was gone, Korab's gone, Schoenfeld's gone, Luce was gone, and the list went on and on. So it was a new team with a whole different bodies that were in the dressing room, and it was finding that chemistry to be a champion, and we just couldn't find it.
Did it come as any sort of relief then? Were you ready to make the move when the trade to Calgary came along?
I wasn't. I didn't want to be traded. I love Buffalo. I still do. I mean, it was interesting in the fact that I was negotiating my I guess it'd be my third deal, and we were very close in settling. And I had fired Eagleson as my agent after my first contract, and I went on my own. And I was, virtually I had an accountant in Buffalo assisting me with that contract. And we were sitting in the meeting, and what happened was Scotty leaked that he was going to sign me and then trade me. And I looked and turned to Bob Engel and I said, Bob, if he's trading me, I'm not signing here because I'm going to be able to go somewhere else and probably get more money. So sure enough, we left the meeting, and then 2 weeks later, just at the draft, I was traded to Calgary. It was between Washington and Calgary. And I ended up getting traded there. About a week later, I met with Cliff Fletcher, and the negotiation took 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was for a lot more money than what I was going to get out of Buffalo. But trust me, I was sad to leave Buffalo. We raised 3 of our kids. They were all born in Buffalo. They're all American citizens. I mean, I still have a lot of friends there. I still go back there and visit friends and play in a few golf tournaments and go back and do the odd alumni function and things like that to promote the Sabres. But I love Buffalo.
Yeah, well, talk about a sports town too. I mean, that city gets behind its sports teams.
Yeah. I think they went through, the last 10, 15 years, the Sabres have really struggled. They just haven't been able to find their way. I think they're slowly getting back there, but they still got a year or two to sort of get to that, elite group of what I would call 4 to 6 teams in the league. They're trying, but there's such a level playing field in the league now with the salary cap, is that nobody dominates anymore. It's sort of like you build a team for one year and then you got to retool it and build it again. So it's a hard thing, and I think Kevin Adams is trying to do his best. But again, it's a matter of signing and drafting good players, and then keeping yourself under the salary cap in a small market.
Did your heart break just a little bit for them in the 99 Cup with the famous foot increase finish?
I did, as much as I would like to have seen the Sabres win in that, Hasek was the star. I mean, Dominic, he made that team and he made them better. And, to see them lose, it set them back. But, that's what the game is all about. It's the toughest cup to win. You got to battle it out for 28 games if every series goes 7 games, and it's a tough haul.
You're not just mentioning Hasek because you're a fellow goaltender. What you said is absolutely true, and I think everybody that's watched any hockey knows it. He carried that team and was the biggest reason why they got as far as they did. But I wanted to ask, as a former stand-up goaltender and what you did, what did you think of Mr. Unorthodox there in Dominic Hasek?
Well, it was interesting after I had retired and sort of he began to step away from the game a little bit. We've had the odd opportunity to chat, and he was ambidextrous in a lot of ways. I mean, his arms were flying every which direction, but he had great instincts for the puck. I wouldn't say he had the greatest style of all time, with the best fundamentals, but he just had a way of stopping the puck and making it, a job look easy that was difficult. He made saves sometimes that you say, how did he ever do that? But his reflexes were so good, and he had a real vision on where the puck was.
When we talked earlier about Lafleur, you mentioned that 81 Canada Cup team that you were a part of, backing up Mike Liut, but it's got to feel special. What did it mean to you to play for Team Canada?
Well, the walk in the dressing room with Team Canada, it was an unbelievable feeling. 40 guys invited to camp. We had a lot of young guys there that they were trying to give exposure to, Paul Reinhardt at the time and Paul Coffey and some of those guys that were just starting to come in the league. It was funny, just down here the other day, Craig Hartsburg walked into the place I helped with some golf product. And, I hadn't seen Hartsy in a couple of years, and he came in and, we were teammates in the 81 Canada Cup. He was there as well. But they're, playing with guys like Lafleur and Larry Robinson, and, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, it was a dynamic group of people, of players, I should say. And to be a part of that, I was blessed, and I was particularly taken and I felt very proud that I was able to play the semifinal game. I was not supposed to. It was Billy Smith and Mike were probably going to play the games. In fact, when it came time for the final pair downs, Eagleson came to me and in Edmonton and said that only 2 goaltenders could practice with the team. Well, it was very interesting. It was a lie, at that time, because I had talked to both Billy and Mike, and I told them that that they were expected to play and to take as much practice as they wanted. I'd just be a bystander at the sides. But Eagleson sort of took it that he wanted, whether Billy or Mike had talked to him, whatever else may be, he sort of didn't want me to be on the ice. He told me I could practice with the trainer after practice, after the team had practiced. And I looked at myself, I said, why would I stick around here and practice with the trainer when I can go home to Buffalo and practice with the guys and get ready for training camp? Well, I flew, Steve Shutt was the last cut along with me. I was not cut. I left. Steve was cut. But Steve and I flew the red eye back from Edmonton to Toronto, and I just gotten home and on the day, and the next morning, I should say, on the red eye. And then I was called by my brother-in-law to say, go play golf. Well, I went and played golf in a little tournament at Glendale Golf Club in Hamilton, and got home late. Phone rang at 7 o'clock the next morning, and it was Scotty Bowman asking me to come back and meet the team that night in Winnipeg because Billy had broken his finger. So anyways, Aggie Kukowitz, who was worked with Air Canada at the time, coordinated a flight for me because he said, can you get on an 11 o'clock flight from Toronto to Winnipeg? And I said, no, I can't get there in time. So it was odd. I ended up having to fly from Buffalo to Chicago, from Chicago to Winnipeg. And when I landed in Winnipeg, they just came on the air. Everybody sit down. They come in and grab me off the plane. They opened up the luggage compartment, grabbed my hockey bag, wished me over to the Winnipeg Arena. And I walked in at virtually about 10 after 7, and I was dressed and on the bench for the start of the game.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. How could you I guess you don't have time to really get nervous or mentally prepare anything.
Well, I didn't get prepared because it came so quick, but all of a sudden I walked in the dressing room in Winnipeg, and I can't tell you there wasn't one player that was there Potvin, Robinson, you name it, LaFleur, they all came up to me and embraced me and said, "Welcome back." And I was really touched by that, you know. And it was interesting. We flew that night after the game in Winnipeg. We flew that night from there to Mirabel Airport in Montreal. And I still remember getting my luggage. You know, my equipment had been taken by the trainers, but I had my luggage, you know, that with me. And I'm walking through the airport, and who comes up beside me is Scotty Bowman. And Scotty came up to me and he said, "Welcome back." Well, oddly enough, you know, just before the semifinal game, I wasn't expecting to play. I went to the game not knowing I'd been, you know, be playing. And just before warm up, Scotty came in and said, "You're playing." And so, you know, I had tears in my eyes to think that I was representing Canada. And I knew how proud my mom and dad would be of me and all of my family.
Goodness. Did you play it in those same 5-minute segments?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. And we beat the Soviets 7-3 in that game, you know. And I felt bad for Mike in the final game because, you know, we got beat pretty bad. But I really felt bad for Mike in the fact I thought there at the time at the end of the second period, I believe the score was 5-1. And I thought, you know, knowing Scotty, that he might put me in to try and change the wave. But I think he was also being respectful to Mike, knowing that, you know, Mike had some a great year the year before.
You know, and I recognize that comparing eras is unfair, and it's going to be always a subjective conversation. But I'm just thinking of all these names you're rattling off here, Don, yourself among them. I mean, were you not part of the best era in the National Hockey League? No disrespect to the Crosbys and the McDavids today, but goodness gracious.
Well, you know, it was funny. You know, I look back 14 teams, you know, sort of when I broke in, I believe that's what it was. But I look at the team in Philadelphia and the big line there of Barber, Leach, and Clark. And then, you know, you go over to the, you know, the Islanders, and there's Gillies and Trottier and Bossy. And then you go to Montreal and you've got Lemaire and Cournoyer and Lafleur, you know, and it goes on and on. And then in Buffalo, we had the French Connection. You go into Toronto and you had Daryl and Lanny and Tiger. I mean, you know, out in Los Angeles, you had the Triple Crown line of Dion, Taylor, and Simmer. I mean, every team seemed to all have a big line. Every team seemed to have that big defenseman. Some had more than others. And then, you know, around the league, you know, there was goaltenders like Dryden and Front, Rogie and Cheevers and Palmetier, and you know, it was just a fun time to play. And I mean, you know, I think you make a good comment, Mike, that maybe it was some of the best pro hockey players ever, the best generation. Well, maybe it was. I don't know. I'll let the others decide that. But I know I played against a lot of great players and with a lot of great players.
And one of those players I think you got to play with after the trade to Calgary was Lanny McDonald, wasn't it?
Yes,
Was he there by then? Yeah.
Yeah. Lanny and I became very good friends in Calgary. You know, he'd been traded from Colorado up there. Lanny was going home, you know, a Medicine Hat boy. And, you know, he was the star there, and certainly well recognized.
You mentioned earlier, Don, that one brawl that came in a playoff versus Winnipeg. I would have thought immediately Edmonton, of course, because the old Battle of Alberta. What was it like being a part of that in its heyday?
Well, I'll tell you what, it was war. It was a true war. I mean, I've never been in a situation where two teams hated each other so badly. And you know, it was a little bit, you know, the Calgary oil money and in the refinery of Edmonton. It was sort of like, you know, the two, but it was really, there was real competition of province. Both had great teams. I mean, we had great teams in Calgary, and Edmonton had maybe, you know, they had the better team. They had a little bit more depth. I mean, I look at our team, and then I looked at Edmonton's team, and you know, Edmonton at the time maybe had a little deeper edge in defense that maybe what we did in Calgary. You know, we had some good players in Lanny and Kent Nielsen and some others there. You know, yeah, they had Wayne, and Wayne was in sort of his youthful years, and Curry and Anderson and Messier. But we had some guys in behind that we could go toe to toe with them pretty good. And we had some great games, and I can still recall, you know, the battles that went on, and those will never be forgotten.
That lineup, the Oilers lineup, as a goaltender, must have put the fear of God into you, no?
Not really. I mean, I looked at it as a challenge, but at the same time, I knew their firepower, and it was a sense that I had to be on top of my game, as any goaltender had to be when you played against the Oilers. I mean, they were good. They were very good, and but there was many nights that I played well and beat them too, and I think that's part of the thing of the rivalry. I mean, we could go toe to toe with them pretty much, and and they had some tough guys, and we had some tough guys as well, and both teams really respected each other, and it just happened that maybe Edmonton just had a little bit more depth than we did in Calgary. But
Do you miss?
we were probably certainly the second or third best team in the league at the time.
I don't think there's any question about it. And I wonder if you miss that style and era of hockey, Don.
Um, I do, and I think what's sort of happened, Mike, that I believe is that there's a lot more foreign players in the league today than maybe what there was back then. I think that the players during my era at the end of the season would stay in the towns they played in. They became a part of the fabric in those communities. We were all part of the charity, all the philanthropy that was involved in the city. We were involved in some way or another. The players today, for the most part, they're making so much money that they go home to their hometowns, or the places where they have these rich places or vacation spots that they go to. So I think a lot of the cities have lost that flair, that dynamic of those players staying and residing in those communities.
It reminds me of the old adage that you play for the name or the symbol on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back.
Yeah, yeah. There's not too many teams that you can look at now where I know in Buffalo during our heyday we had anywhere between 14 to 16 players that stayed in the city for the summer, and we became brothers. I mean, we did everything in the summer together and in the winter together. There was a party we were all involved in it. It didn't matter where it was, and it was we just had a different lifestyle that these kids do today. I mean, I think in some ways the league is a little bit overpaid. I really believe. I think sports in general. I think the money's gotten way out of hand, but that's endorsement monies and things like that are now affecting the games. But I think it's also affected some of the smaller markets as well.
That is an excellent observation around the connection to the community, the city where you played. I haven't heard that expressed before. And I think you're absolutely onto something, because you want to win for that city, right?
Yeah. Like I look now, and I still get, notes from time to time from the I get lots of stuff from the Buffalo alumni, but even the Calgary alumni, there's a real strong allegiance of those 80s teams in Calgary there. I look out there, and there's Lanny and Jamie McCowan, and the list goes on, Jim Poplinski, and the list goes on, Jamie Hislop, they're still living there. It just, I think, when you're successful in a city, there's a sense of pride that in you feel at home there. I think today with these players that don't stick around, they all, as soon as the season's over, they're gone. There's a sense of loss of that, and I think there's a loss of connection between the players and the city because of that. And yeah, don't get me wrong, there's still some players that do stick around, but there's less and less. And I think back when I played, there was probably 80%, 85% of the guys were in town, where I think today it might be 15, very few.
Did the time zone, playing in the mountain time zone, mess with you after coming out of the East?
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. It was hard. It was hard. It was hard playing in Calgary when I first got there, playing in that elevation like it was playing in Denver was also tough. But we didn't have any short road trips in Calgary. Edmonton was 3 hours away, and so everything was a flight. We're in Buffalo, we bussed it to Cleveland. We used to bus it to Toronto as well. And we used to bus the odd time to Pittsburgh. But everything in Calgary was flying.
You talk about busing to Toronto, and that's where you finish up your NHL career. Was it like a dream come true for an Ontario kid to put on that jersey?
I'll be honest, probably not. I respected, and I respected the Leafs. The team was in total transition. Jerry had brought in all those kids, Wendell and Russ Courtnall, and I think there was 5 rookie defensemen there. That when I was there, Todd Gill and Gary Nyland and Al Iafrate, and the list goes on and on. Bobby McGill. It just goes on and on and on. I think it was 5 rookies there. And then Borey was still there, but Borey was hurt a lot. He spent a lot of time away from the team with injury or rehab, whatever he was doing. But so we relied on some older veterans, the Brad Maxwell's that, Brad just recently passed away, and some others that, Chris Karsopoulos, and, they were sort of the void that until the kids sort of got groomed. But, they still got their ice time. And, I think, we, looking back, I believe that my first year in Toronto, Danny Maloney, our head coach, did a phenomenal job. And how we ever made the playoffs is no one's guess. But Danny did a great job. I still remember we beat Chicago 4 straight, and everybody looked at us and said, "How'd we do that?" And then we took St. Louis 7 games in the second series. And then the following year, Danny's out. They didn't re-sign Danny, and I thought it was a huge mistake. And then Danny went to Winnipeg, and it was sad to see, because I really believe Danny deserved that second year in Toronto. I would love to have had him back as a coach. It made it change my career a little bit. And I really didn't see. I didn't really see eye to eye with Jerry McNamara either. I just didn't like some of the things he did, and it was probably affected my career as much. And I can't blame Jerry, but I certainly can blame myself. I just didn't like some of the things he did.
How involved was Ballard?
Uh, he was around. Let's put it that way. I don't think Harold was involved in too much of the decision making, but I'm sure behind the scenes he certainly voiced his opinion. I can still recall a couple instances when Harold was traveling with us. His health was failing, but he was certainly an interesting man. I didn't get to know him all that well, but you certainly respected him for who he was and in his presence.
I was thinking about you being in Toronto and, of course, Maple Leaf Gardens. You mentioned the Montreal Forum before, Boston Garden, the old Chicago Arena, Madison Square. I mean, again, not to compare eras, but some of the classic, the best buildings ever probably to play hockey in.
Yeah, absolutely. I played in the old Detroit Olympia,
Right.
the Chicago Stadium, the Montreal Forum, the old Boston Gardens. I mean, I saw all those old, the Los Angeles Forum. I played in all those buildings, that are no longer, many of them are no longer there. And I don't think any of them are there anymore. And even then, Madison Square Gardens has been renovated from when I played. The buildings are a little bit different. We used to play, there used to be 4 or 5 buildings that had small ice surfaces, which was Buffalo and Boston. Chicago was small ice surface, and there was others as well. But certainly when you went into places like the Montreal Forum, it was special. It was a special environment. When you went in there in the morning, you went to your pregame skate in the morning, just to listen to Claude Burrell put the Canadians through the paces. Scotty would be on the ice, but Claude Burrell would be putting them through the paces in the morning, and just to see the snap of the puck on their sticks and the way in which they did things, it opened your eyes on how good professionals and how good a team that was. And I can recall in Buffalo, I think the one year that Montreal had only lost, I think it was the 8 games of the season, they lost 8 games. Buffalo, I think, beat them 3 or 4 times. So we could go toe to toe. I mean, our team was blessed with great talent, and we had our checking line of loose Ramsey and Gare, and they would go against Lafleur and Cornouaille and Lemaire, and we had our scoring line of the French Connection, and then we had some good third liners and some decent fourth liners as well. And the 2 teams were pretty blessed. The Canadians maybe had a little edge in defensemen and Savard, Lapointe, Robinson, but we had Schoenfeld and Korab and Foglin and Billy Height, and so we would match up against them pretty well.
We talked earlier about the pressure that comes with the position, obviously, and being a goaltender, Don, you can also be a target pretty easily. Were there any fan bases that got on you around the game?
Well, I had a couple death threats in hotels, two in particular in New York. But I had graphite pipe threw at me, 9-volt batteries, cigarette lighters, you name it. I mean, beer bottles. In the old Detroit Olympia, you used to walk through the crowd from the dressing room to the ice. You used to walk through the crowd. I mean, they'd be standing like 2 feet away from you. Some of those buildings were tough. I mean, it was certainly an experience to go in and play in some of those buildings.
I know that there was a time that you were thinking just before the end of it all of maybe making a comeback to the NHL, but it didn't happen. How tough was it for you to hang them up?
Well, that's a great story, and if you got a minute, I got to tell you about this. So what happened? I retired, and so I finally got my settlement with the Leafs, and so I was a free agent to do whatever I wanted to. And King Clancy had died in Toronto, and anyways, I received a call from Scotty Bowman, and Scotty, I believe, was in Chicago, and he was going to fly in for uh, King Clancy's funeral, and so he said, "Can you pick me up at the airport?" He said, "I want to meet with you." So it was odd. I picked Scotty up. We went down to St. Michael's Cathedral where the service was, and we were there about an hour before it all started. And Scotty, when we were just waiting in the car, he said, I want you to consider coming back to Buffalo and playing a little bit, also working with the kids and other becoming a goaltending coach as well." And geez, boy, I was pretty excited. I was, 30, I think 34 at the time. And I was pretty eager. So he told me, "Come over and see me in 2 days." So I did. That night, the Sabres were playing Minnesota. I met with Scotty for about 20 minutes, and we were just starting to finalize what my role and how we wanted me to do. He said, "I want to get back, get in shape. I want to sort of platoon you sort of between Buffalo and Rochester, play a few games, and then work with the kids in the organization," because back then there was guys like Darren Pupa and some others, younger guys at the time. And I said, "Great." And so we were just starting to work through some of the details, and Scotty's phone rang, and it was Dory, Seymour Knox's secretary. And so she said to him, "Scotty, Mr. Knox wants to see you right away." So Scotty, hung up, and he said, "Don, can you go out and watch Minnesota practice? And after they're done practicing, I'll come and get you, and we'll finish our conversation." Well, Minnesota came on the ice. I watched all their pregame skate, morning skate, and no Scotty. Scotty never come back. So it's now about 11:45, and the Black Aces of Minnesota were just starting to leave the ice. So the main team had left, and they've already worked out 2 or 3 guys that they had as extras, and they were now leaving the ice. So I decided to go down to the dressing room, the Sabre dressing room, and I saw Rip Simonik. And I said, "Rip," who was the equipment manager, I said, "Rip, have you seen Scotty?" And he said, "You don't know?" And I said, "No, what?" He said, "He was fired an hour ago." So, I didn't know quite what to do. So I went home. I drove back to Toronto, and then I called Jerry Meehan, who was the interim GM, who took over from Scotty on the interim basis. And I said, "Jerry," I said, "I was in talks with Scotty about coming back and playing a little bit and helping the kids." And he said, "I can't do anything because I'm just the interim GM," and that was it. So it never went any further. But I was that close. If Scotty would have been there probably through the rest of the day, I was probably going to be a Buffalo Sabre again, and I would have been I would have been so happy. So later that summer, it never worked out. But later that summer, we sold our home in Toronto. We built a new home in Buffalo and moved back to Buffalo.
Well, I was going to say, you would have been so happy. Buffalo would have been so happy, I think, to see
Yeah.
Don Edwards come back.
Yeah. Well, I was still, I felt I could still play. That was the crazy thing about it. I thought I got a raw deal in Toronto with Jerry. I really did. I really thought I got a raw deal. That my second year going into Toronto, I'd worked my ass off. It was probably in the best condition of my life. I mean, I was running 7 miles 6 days a week, and I was running them in almost marathon speed. And then after I got done, I'd go home and do 30 or 40 laps in my pool, have a light breakfast, and then I'd get down to the gardens and I'd work on the UBE machines, on the upper body. And I was in tremendous shape. I think that year I went into camp and I had like 4% body fat. I mean, there was only one guy better than me, and that was Boria. Borey's body fat was 2.8. So like the two oldest guys on the team, we were in the best shape. I mean, Borey was just, he was a physical specimen to begin with, but I really worked my ass off, and what I could do was incredible. And how I got there was that, I was living in Mississauga on Fleet Street, which was just around the corner from Don Cherry. And every morning around 8 o'clock, I'd go out and I'd run virtually 7 miles. I'd run along out past Don's and out onto the service road. And what I would do is I'd run as fast as I could from telephone post to telephone post. And then when I got to the second telephone post, I'd run at a normal run speed. And then when I got to the following telephone post again, I'd sprint. And I did that for 7 miles. And my times went from like 43 minutes down at the end when I was running them in about 35, 34, 35. That's how fast I was doing, because I would purposely carry a stopwatch and follow my times every day. And every day I had to get better. It was like the 5-minute hockey game for me. So, I really thought I got a raw deal, because John Brophy came in that year as the coach after Danny had left, and I was sort of moved, and they sent me to Newmarket, and I wasn't going to have that, because I really believed I could still play in the National Hockey League.
It's funny when you mentioned it was like that 5-minute segments in the hockey game. That's exactly what I thought when you talked about those telephone poles. And maybe that speaks on to, the orderliness you like to have in your life or in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I was dedicated that year specifically to get my body in the best shape I could ever do. It was almost like the year I went to play with Team Canada, because, before camp, I went to Florida for 2 weeks. I ran in the sand on Clearwater Beach. I'd go out and do 5 miles and run in the sand, and then I'd get back, and then I'd go swim in the pool. And then after I left Florida, I went back to Buffalo, and then we flew to Victoria, BC. We went out to Chemong, and then I ran in the mountains at my aunt and uncle's place up there, and I'd run 3 or 4 miles in the mountains. That probably wasn't a wise decision at the time because of all the cougars out there, the mountain lions and everything else out there. But anyways, I was in great shape. So when I went to camp with Team Canada, this was really interesting. We practiced twice a day. We practice in the morning, and then we go back to the hotel. We'd have a little lunch, and then we'd practice like at 1:30 until 2. We would scrimmage at that point for like an hour and 15 minutes. And it was a rule that at the end of that second practice, we had, I believe it's called Victoria Park there, we had to go down and either run 5 miles in the park. We'd run out of the Montreal Forum and up around Victoria Park. I believe that's what it's called. And then back to the Forum. Or the guys had to do a half hour on the bike. Well, 3/4 of us ran, or most of us ran. I think there was very few guys. I think Dennis Potvin didn't run, only because he had bad groin. But most of us. And so the early part was that Ray Bork and I ran all the time together, and we were the lead pack. We were way out in front. And then within a few days, Wayne Gretzky joined us, and then Daryl Stiltler joined us, and then Bob Gainey joined us. So the 5 of us, we were like the lead pack, and the other guys were well behind.
That's quite the elite running club you established there.
Yeah, it was neat. It was really, I see Borky every so often here in Florida. He doesn't live far from me, and I see him, and we quite often we'll see each other. We'll reminisce about our time running in Montreal.
When you were talking about those conversations with Scotty Bowman and working with some of the kids and coming back to Buffalo, you did coach a bit. Did you ever consider pursuing it more aggressively?
Well, I coached with Los Angeles with Larry, and I was an assistant coach there. And then I left when Larry left. I stayed 2 years with Andy Murray, and then I left there, and then I went to Carolina and worked for Paul Maurice. Paul was great to work for. I have the utmost respect for Paul Maurice. He's a great coach, as I do with Larry. And then I left there, and I ran the team, the Tier 2 team in Oakville. And then after that, I went on to be the general manager in Saginaw. And I would like to, keep those thoughts to myself. It wasn't the best experience of my life, to be truthful with you, but because they had went through, I think at that point, I think it was 7 coaches and 5 general managers before I got there in a very short period of time. And I just got caught in that wave. I remember, this is funny, Mike, but the year that Pete was there, was the coach with Kitchener, and Pete and I worked hard to work out a deal, because he needed players in the Memorial Cup because Kitchener was hosting it. So Pete wanted a player by the name of Ryan McDonough that I had in Saginaw, and we worked hard. The deal almost took a month to work out. But the package I was getting back from the Rangers, I would have got players like Maverick Parks, and there was a defenseman that was from Rochester, New York. You might know this kid's name. Just skips my memory for a second. I was getting a left winger that went on. He was traded to, ended up being traded to London, that scored 40 goals the following year. And I had 2 first-round picks with that. And I was pretty happy to get that deal done. I went back to Saginaw to try and sell that deal to the ownership, and they wouldn't accept it. And I went, we were in a complete rebuilding mode, but I can recall another deal I had that was with Barrie, and it was a sizable deal for another centerman we had, and I was getting 3 players back in that deal as well, plus a draft pick, and they just wouldn't accept it. And so I was, my hands were a little tied. I felt like at times I had handcuffs on, and so it's tough to work in that environment. And I was the hockey guy. I was the guy that had all the experience. And when they don't let you use your imagination and use your mindset to better the team, then you're not in a good situation.
Is it a good place to be now, watching your grandson play goal and being around the game at that level?
It is. It's funny. I didn't skate for 9 years when I left Saginaw. I didn't skate for almost 9 years, and then my granddaughter came along, and I skated with her, took her out on the ice once, and then my grandson came along 5 years ago, and he started skating. I got him skating 3 years ago. We put him on the ice, and I started carrying him around for a while, and then he started getting a little bit of balance, and we encouraged him, and now the little bugger can fly now. He there's no stopping. He just loves the game. He just loves the game. He wants to be a goalie in the worst way. But as I've said, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I told his mom and dad, let him become a really good skater before you put him in the net.
It's a great story, and I love to hear about the enthusiasm that kids still have for this game that we love so much.
The nice thing too, I look back, and you mentioned about the career. My career in Kitchener, I don't know if many players, goaltenders have went through there, have went on and had the junior career they have. 2 first-team All-Stars, and then I was picked up by the Marlies for the Memorial Cup in '75, and we won the cup that year. And then going on to Buffalo and win the Vezina, and being an NHL All-Star and playing with Team Canada. I don't know of any other goaltenders in Kitchener that have had that type of record, to be quite truthful with you. I know there's been teams in Kitchener went on and won the Memorial Cup, but I don't know of any other goaltenders that have really went on and had a career in the National Hockey League with any performance or stats that they could look back on and say, geez, that was a really good career. And I was really blessed to be able to do that.
That's why your name comes up so often still around the rink to this day. When we talk about us to ever play goal for the Kitchener Rangers, Don Edwards' name is always near the top of the list.
If I was ever invited back, in some special form, I'd definitely be there. I just got so many great memories there, Mike. I mean, those people working for guys like Jerry Moser, Kitchener Beverages, my first year, because I was done school at the time. I was already finished grade 12. But I worked at Kitchener Beverages. In the second year, I worked for Gus Maui at a sports store on Union Street, and he was the head pro at Westmount Golf Club. So I got to know a lot of people there, Ernie and Ricky Hauser, the Mosers, and the list goes on of the people I got to know there. And even, going back there today, I still go back for the odd golf tournament that I'm invited to, but, I often run into people that I know there that, I haven't seen for a lot of years, but, I'm always eager to see them again.
Well, when you're starting to list off names like Moser, Hauser, and Maui in this town, that's like the Waterloo County royalty over here.
yeah. And it was, I was, like I said, Kitchener was such a great town to me. I mean, it was sad to leave junior hockey, but at the same time, I was happy to move on to a professional career too. But I was, I left with a feeling of comfort and happiness, and then I'd received support from some very great people, and that's why I think so highly of Kitchener Waterloo.
I'm so glad to hear it, and I can tell you, as I mentioned a moment ago, Kitchener Waterloo thinks very highly of Don Edwards too. There's no question about that. I did want to touch on, because your name's been in the news this past year, as for a couple of reasons. One is the book that you're working on, and
Yeah,
the other, the reason that you're working on it.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know if a lot of people know this part of Don Edwards' story, but in 1991, what I would describe as unspeakable tragedy came your way.
Right. Yeah. My mother and father were murdered March 21st, 1991. It was I mean, a horrifying moment in our lives. I mean, um, can't tell you the devastation it caused for all of our family. From it, I got post-traumatic stress disorder after it because I think it was a lot of issues that happened. I was myself and my brother-in-laws were the first back in the home after we were allowed back um, in after the coroner and the police had left and they did all their investigation. Um, and see that house destroyed. It was just so upsetting. And then the two trials, having to deal with and deal with a situation of an auction where you see your family's the household really be auctioned off in like 4 to 6 hours, and seeing cherished items that you were surrounded by in life, all of a sudden gone. There was just it was very traumatic. Um, it was funny earlier today. In fact, about 15 minutes before I buzzed into the Zoom here, I was writing a victim impact statement because we have another hearing on December 8th. Now, the individual that killed my parents, George Harding Lovey, he's on day parole, and and he's in Sudbury. He still has to report to his halfway house, a couple times a week, but he's now requesting full parole on him. We're in the fight of our life right now, Mike, to try and keep him in. I mean, he prior to killing my parents, he had sexually assaulted and raped my sister, and he also threatened through his sister to kidnap her, which was my children and my nephew and nieces. So there is a serious threat there. I mean, it's something that doesn't go away. We deal with it, and now we're preparing to go, to put our victim impact statements in for another hearing that will be coming up December 8th, which may, he may get his full parole, which at that point he's able to go anywhere in Canada and possibly move back next door to my sisters or whatever. And that was one of the main reasons why I left Canada, as I know convicted felons can't come to the U.S. But I've taken some serious measures in my regard as well. My wife and I now have our concealed weapons permit. That would have been something I would never have thought about getting, but I've got a threat in my life, and I'm going to protect my family if it comes down to it. So these are all things that have impacted us, and I can't even tell you. I think this is the 11th or 12th victim impact statement I've written, along with my wife and family members and friends. And so we're preparing, and we'll do our best to try and keep him at least in a day parole, and so he can't visit the regions. And it's funny, Kitchener-Waterloo is one of the areas that we have on our with the Parole Board of Canada. That's one of the areas that he can't go to is Kitchener-Waterloo, and for good reason. We have family members that live there, and so we've all done our part. The Haldimand, Norfolk, Caledonia area is another. The Peterborough area is another, where my wife and I, our son and his wife are, he lived a great deal of part of his life, and his wife is from that area. So we've certainly been very diligent trying to put areas that he can't go to, and if he gets full parole, those restrictions all go away, and we sure hope that doesn't happen.
This is the part that I struggle with, and I admire your determination in this regard, Don, beyond comprehension, because you're talking 10, 11, 12 times that you're going back with victim impact statements, and
Yeah.
it must sour you on the system, I'll use in air quotes here in Canada, that allows this to keep happening.
Yeah. Well, if you walk back, and I have a huge bonus room in the back of my home here, and it's where all my memorabilia is, that I've collected over the years from my All-Star jerseys, the one from Washington. I actually have Ronald Reagan's signature on it. There's actually two of those sweaters in the world. One sits in the Reagan Library with Reagan one, and I have the other jersey, which is Edwards one. And when I was working with the Kings, I knew somebody on his detail on a Secret Service detail, and he took the jersey to him and had him sign it. But I have some things. I have my Team Canada jersey back there. Now, I was very proud to play with Team Canada, but I got to be honest with you, my disdain for Canada and the Canadian justice system. I mean, I am so bitter. It's unreal. The Canadian justice system has failed us. The Parole Board of Canada has failed us. So many things, the liberal attitude there is over the top. I often talk to friends back there. In fact, I played golf with a guy on Saturday down here that is a well-known person in Ontario, and he even said to me, "It's crazy there now. It's things I thought things were maybe bad in the States right now with some of the things that have gone on with our government here, but it's even crazier from what I understand in Canada."
Has writing the book been therapeutic to you in any way?
It has. I had it. I'll be honest with you. It's funny. I go at it from, I go at it from it's sort of like 5-minute segments again. I have to take my pauses though, because, my post-traumatic stress disorder kicks in, and then I have to stop writing. Now, I went through a really tough patch about 3 months ago where I was writing about the trial. And the trial was really, difficult because there was so much information that was, presented in just the testimony was overwhelming. And listening to the 911 call, and where you can hear my parents' voices and things like that, and you can hear the attack in the house, and it's just gory. And there's times that I have to collect myself and step away to say, I've got to change what I'm doing right now. And it was interesting. Writing the victim impact statement today was easy, but at the same time, trying to make sure I've got my full thoughts on paper is difficult. The other thing that's disappointing about this one, and this is important, Mike, and I'm pissed at the Parole Board of Canada. All of the other parole sessions have all been with us present, all of the family. You sit there in front of the Parole Board. George Harding Lovey sits, in front of the Parole Board, and then we sit virtually about 3 feet behind him. There's no protection between us. He sits right in front of. There's no wall. There's nothing. And you can I can reach out and touch him if I wanted to, but this time all of the others, starting way back in 2011, I guess or even before that, we were present for them all. Now this one, they want to do a Zoom call where it's like you and I, and so the Parole Board and Lovey will sit in a room, and my suspicions is that they're doing it because my belief is that they're going to give them full parole. They don't want the family there. They don't want to see us. They don't want to witness our emotions, our disdain for them. And that's my suspicions. And the opening part of my victim impact statement certainly goes into depth. The first paragraph goes into depth about my feeling of disrespect the Parole Board of Canada has given us in this parole hearing. I'm going to try and get as many media people as I can involved in that on that Zoom call, because the more awareness we have, the more heat we'll put on the Parole Board. But it's not easy, to get people's attention about the need that we are asking and the time that we're asking for their support. It's emotional. It is very stressful, as you may be well aware, but our families went through hell. I mean, absolutely went through hell.
And the reality is, if I may, still goes through hell.
Yeah.
This impact is still real 30 plus years later.
Yeah. That threat is real to us. Somebody says, his risk management counselor may say that he is low to moderate risk. Low to moderate risk doesn't gel with us. I mean, low to moderate risk is a risk. I don't care how you think of it. And the onus of responsibility, should anything ever happen, that onus of responsibility will fall right on top of the Canadian government, the Canadian justice system, the Parole Board of Canada, and Corrections Canada. So, I mean, it's happened in the past. There's nothing to say that it won't happen in the future. But, it's well documented that, these offenders have come out and reoffended. And the second time they reoffend is even worse than the first, because they're out to get you.
I will definitely be keeping my eyes and ears on December the 8th, you said, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't imagine, Don, but thank you for sharing the story and the generosity you've had with your time here today. I mean,
Yeah.
listen, talking hockey is a lot of fun. I hope it's a nice respite
Yeah.
for you too, but this is an important
Yeah.
part of the story, and I'm grateful to you for sharing it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for sharing it and listening to it, because lots of people, it's interesting. Many people don't understand the magnitude of how it affected our lives. But virtually, when I, got my post-traumatic stress disorder, I virtually became a recluse for about 3.5 years. And people wondered after the trials, where Don Edwards go. I was dealing with a serious issue in my life, and it wasn't until 1995 when, I finally had written my goaltending book, my goaltending critiquing manual, and sent it off to a couple NHL teams. And my good friend Larry Robinson, he took the job there and needed a goaltending coach, and happened to see it and reached out to me, and that was my opportunity to jump back in the league. But I went through about 4.5 years, a pretty rough patch in my life where, trying to sort things through and just trying to keep my own salvation. I mean, everything from suicide, you name it, it goes through your mind.
And yet here we are having this conversation.
Yeah.
That's a testament to you, sir. And if I may, when that night happens in Kitchener, we're going to make sure, I'd like to shake your hand in person. Okay. We'll get you back here. We'll have some ceremony for something. Okay.
No, it's interesting in the fact that, it's interesting the fact that I feel so blessed, and I do apologize my phone there, but I feel so blessed that, to have been able to spend time in Kitchener. I met so many great people. It's a great hockey community. And I have the utmost respect for the organization and the community itself.
I think we feel similarly. And I'll thank you very much again for making time to do this with me today, Don.
Thanks, Mike. All the best to you, and good health to you.